Hello, this is a recorded mini lecture meant to address a very common misunderstanding about supply and demand. If there's a shortage in a market, firms need to increase their supply. There are a couple of issues with this statement. First of all, if there's a shortage, supply isn't what changes. The word need is particularly troublesome here. It suggests that it's the firm's problem. And in fact, firms don't need to do anything. There's another mechanism that responds to a shortage within the market. Here are two other statements that include the exact same problems, or similar problems. When demand increases, supply must also increase to reach equilibrium. Again, the problem here is the word must. While it's true that if supply increased, equilibrium would be restored, it doesn't need to increase because there's something else that will affect the market or fix the problem. Third statement, firms see a demand increase as a chance for higher profits, so supply increases. This statement doesn't use the word need or must. The issue here is that in response to an increase in demand, supply would not change. Rather, there's something else that moves. Actually, when a market isn't in equilibrium, it's the price that adjusts. Neither the firm nor the consumer nor the government have to do this. In fact, it's as if all consumers and all firms are sort of simultaneously causing the price to go up. Nobody has control over it, as if there is, say, an invisible hand, a phrase coined by Adam Smith, the founder of microeconomics, as if an invisible hand is causing this price to go up to find equilibrium. This causes the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded to change, and then at the right price, called the equilibrium price, those quantities are equal. The misunderstanding that supply must move to keep up with demand probably comes from a belief that the equilibrium price is a single number and it's the only equilibrium price that's possible. If demand were to increase, as drawn, this belief implies that for the market to return to equilibrium, supply must move, such as this, so that the blue curves intersect at the original equilibrium price, and equilibrium is restored. Remember, though, that demand represents a willingness to buy, and supply represents a willingness to produce. The existence of a shortage or an increase in demand doesn't change willingness. In the same way, it doesn't make sense to say that an increase in supply would cause buyers to become more excited about the product, increasing their willingness to purchase things. The existence of a surplus or a shortage doesn't change the willingness. Something else has to move to restore equilibrium. So here we have my original response, along with a graph of supply and demand that we can use for illustration. When a market is not in equilibrium, the price is what adjusts. We need to start this explanation by representing some sort of event that causes the market to not be in equilibrium. As it's drawn, the market currently is in equilibrium. The price is the one where supply and demand intersect that causes the quantity supplied and quantity demanded to be equal. That's the definition of a market equilibrium. We get the market out of equilibrium by illustrating an event that causes either the supply or demand curves to increase or decrease, or we could use a more complex event that shifts both, but that's not necessary for our purposes right here. Let's suppose that the demand curve increases, shown as a shift to the right, like such. And we'll also draw a supply curve that's the same as the original one. So here we have blue curves that represent before the event, supply and demand, and we have red curves that represent the market after the event. So the supply curve hasn't moved, but the demand curve shifted to the right. We can then erase the original curves and use this to show that at the original equilibrium price, which hasn't changed yet, the market's not in equilibrium because the supply or demand curves have shifted. Here it was a shift in demand. At the current price, the quantity supplied and quantity demanded are not equal to each other. This is what we call a shortage. It would be represented on the graph by the horizontal distance between the two quantities. in response to the shortage, the market will increase the price towards the equilibrium. And if the price were the one drawn now, we would see that the quantity supplied would increase to here, representing an increase in production, but not an increase in supply. This would be called an increase in quantity supplied. It's also important to notice that this would also decrease quantity demanded. So it's not only sellers that change their behaviors. In response to the higher price, both quantities change, and they converge so that they're now closer together. There is still a shortage as represented here, but we see that the shortage is smaller. As long as that shortage exists, the market will continue to put upward pressure on the prices. If the price reaches this purple one, we see that the quantity supplied has increased and the quantity demanded has decreased until those quantities are equal. This is the new equilibrium, and that's how the market reaches it. The order of the steps in the adjustment process is extremely important. Let's add some clarity to our explanation by adding some numbers to the graph to indicate the order that these things happen. Step 0 isn't drawn, and that is that something in the market has to change to cause the market to be out of equilibrium. This could be an increase or a decrease in demand, or a shift in the supply function. Remember that we chose to illustrate this as an increase in demand. Step 1 then is that the market has to identify that it's not in equilibrium as either a surplus or a shortage. In our picture, we have a surplus because the quantity demanded exceeds the quantity supplied as a result of an increase in demand. But the price hasn't adjusted yet. Step 2 is that the market responds to this surplus or shortage by increasing the price. There are really 3 steps here. First, the price increases, and simultaneously, the quantities supplied and demanded react. In the picture, 2A is representing a movement along the supply curve in response to that higher price to a higher quantity supplied, and 2B is illustrating a movement along the demand curve to a higher price and a lower quantity demanded. From the earlier picture, with that higher quantity supplied and the lower quantity demanded, the shortage still exists, but it's smaller. It would be shown as the horizontal gap along the green price line between the supply and demand curves. The third step in the process is for the market to identify that the price has adjusted to the right amount. The arrow for step 2 has now been drawn to show that the price is adjusted all the way, so that it is at the price level where supply and demand intersect. At that price, the quantity supplied, found on the supply curve where the price line intersects it and then drawn down, is equal to the quantity demanded, and therefore the quantity supplied and quantity demanded are equal, and we say that the market has reached a new equilibrium. Again, the supply curve does not need to adjust in response to a demand curve, and in fact the supply curve won't respond just because the demand curve is moved. It is true, however, that firms will produce more, but this is shown in the graph as an increase in the quantity supplied in response to an increase in the price. It's left as an exercise for you to practice on your own, writing this explanation and drawing the graph to support it for a demand decrease, a supply increase, a supply decrease, or a double shift. Any of these cases that cause the market to move out of equilibrium would then be followed by a nearly identical process, the price adjusting, causing the quantities to converge and reach at a new equilibrium where the quantity supplied and quantity demanded are equal. If you're working through these practice exercises on your own, pay special attention to how you use the graph and how you label the graph to add clarity to your response.